He called her his greatest asset, but treated her like a beautiful, silent piece of art. To the world, Lorenzo Holston was a titan of industry, a man who had built a hospitality empire from the ground up. His wife, Felicity, was the quiet, elegant woman by his side, the perfect hostess in their gilded cage. But in the glittering world of high society, secrets are the most valuable currency. Tonight, at the grand unveiling of his flagship restaurant, Lorenzo will make the mistake of his life. He will flaunt his mistress, believing his wife is too timid to react. He has forgotten one crucial detail. A signature on a piece of paper is more powerful than a name in lights. The silence in the penthouse was a physical presence. It lived in the vast, empty spaces between the minimalist Italian furniture and clung to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city's glittering skyline. Felicity Davies Holston knew this silence intimately. It was the soundtrack to her 5-year marriage. She traced the rim of a porcelain teacup, her reflection a pale, distorted oval on its surface. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but in here, on the 80th floor of the Olympus building, time seemed to move at the speed of Lorenzo's convenience. Her husband, Lorenzo Holston, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. He wasn't just loud. His very presence consumed the oxygen in a room. To the public, he was the charismatic founder of Holston Hospitality, a rapidly expanding empire of luxury hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants. He was on the cover of Fortune and Apex Business Quarterly. His narrative, a carefully constructed fable of a self-made man with a Midas touch. Felicity knew the truth. The empire wasn't built from the ground up by him. It was built on a foundation so old and deep that Lorenzo couldn't even comprehend its scale. A foundation he had been handed, not one he had laid. The chime of his phone left carelessly on the marble island, sliced through the quiet. Felicity didn't need to look. She knew the name that would be on the screen: Tiffany Blair. Tiffany, the impossibly blonde, surgically enhanced public relations consultant Lorenzo had hired 6 months ago. Her public relations duties seemed to extend far beyond boardrooms and press releases usually taking place in 5-star hotel suites during Lorenzo's business trips. "Lissy, darling." Lorenzo's voice boomed as he strode into the kitchen, already dressed in a bespoke tuxedo. He smelled of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. "Is my Patek on the dresser, the rose gold one? It needs to match the cufflinks." He didn't wait for an answer, already moving towards the master suite. He treated her less like a wife and more like a highly intuitive but ultimately invisible domestic assistant. In the beginning, she had believed his charm. He had pursued her with a relentless energy, captivated by her quiet grace and what he called her old-world elegance. He had no idea how literal that description was. Felicity came from old money, but a reclusive, intensely private kind. Her father, the late Jonathan Davies, had built Northgate Holdings, a silent behemoth of real estate, finance, and private equity. He despised the limelight and had raised his only daughter to value discretion above all else. When Felicity met Lorenzo, a promising but moderately successful hotel manager, she saw a spark of drive she admired. Weary of suitors who only saw her family's name, she had allowed Lorenzo to believe she was from a comfortable but unremarkable background. She wanted to be loved for herself. It was a naive, romantic notion that had curdled into a slow, corrosive regret. They married, and with her father's blessing, she used a fraction of her inheritance channeled through a labyrinthine series of trusts to anonymously fund Lorenzo's ambitions. Northgate Holdings created Holston Hospitality as a subsidiary, installing Lorenzo as its public-facing president. He was given a generous salary, unlimited expenses, and the illusion of ownership. The condition stipulated by Felicity was that the true source of the funding remained a secret. Lorenzo, blinded by the sudden influx of limitless capital, eagerly agreed, concocting a story about a consortium of silent European investors who believed in his genius. "Did you hear me, Lissy?" he called from the bedroom. "I need the watch. It's in the top right drawer of the mahogany chest, Lorenzo." She replied, her voice even. "Where it always is?" He reappeared, fastening the watch to his wrist. He paused, looking her up and down. She was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was timeless, understated, and worth more than the car Tiffany Blair drove. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, a faint frown creasing his brow. "It's a bit plain for tonight, isn't it? The launch of the Aperture Club is the biggest event of the year. My biggest event. My." He always said my company, my success, my restaurant. "I think it's appropriate," she said softly. "Appropriate doesn't get you on the society pages, darling," he scoffed, adjusting his bow tie in the reflection of a chrome appliance. "Tiffany is having a custom gown flown in from Milan. Now that's how you make an entrance." He said it without a hint of shame, as if discussing the catering. The casual cruelty was worse than any shouted accusation. It was the cruelty of indifference. He didn't even see her as a person with feelings to hurt anymore. She was just a fixture, a piece of the scenery in the grand play of his life. For months, Felicity had endured the humiliation, the whispers at charity balls, the pitying looks from the other wives, the photos snapped by paparazzi of Lorenzo and Tiffany, leaving a late-night dinner, his arm slung possessively around her. Felicity had held on to the hope that the man she thought she had married was still in there, somewhere, buried beneath the ego. She had honored her promise to her father to live a private life. But her father was also a man of immense pride and strength. He would never have tolerated this level of disrespect. Lorenzo's phone chimed again. He snatched it up, a wide grin spreading across his face as he read the message. "Tiffany's just sent a picture of the dress. Spectacular. Absolutely spectacular. A real showstopper." He typed a rapid reply, his thumbs flying across the screen. Felicity watched him, and in that moment, something within her, a long dormant thing, made of steel and resolve, finally clicked into place. The naive girl who wanted to be loved for herself was gone. In her place was the daughter of Jonathan Davies, the sole heiress of Northgate Holdings, a woman who owned this penthouse, the tuxedo on her husband's back, the watch on his wrist, and the restaurant he was about to launch. He had mistaken her silence for weakness. He was about to learn it was the quiet hum of an engine gathering power before a storm. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. It had gone cold. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice cutting through his self-absorbed reverie. It had a new edge to it, a cool precision that made him look up. "What is it?" "We need to be leaving in 20 minutes. "You're right," she said, standing up and placing her cup in the sink. "Tonight is going to be a very big night. One for the history books." He smirked, misinterpreting her words entirely. "That's the spirit, darling." Finally getting excited. "Just try and look happy for the cameras, will you? It reflects well on me." As she walked past him towards her own dressing room, a plan began to form in her mind. It was audacious, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. She had spent 5 years as a ghost in her own life. Tonight she would become a queen, and she would watch his counterfeit kingdom burn to the ground. Felicity closed the door to her dressing room a vast space of polished sycamore and soft grey carpets that served as her sanctuary. For a moment, she leaned against the cool wood, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't fear. It was the exhilarating, terrifying rush of a decision made. The dam of her restraint, built over years of quiet observation and swallowed pride, had finally broken. She walked over to a discreet biometric safe hidden behind a full-length mirror. She pressed her thumb to the scanner, and the panel slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, amongst her family heirlooms and personal documents, was a simple encrypted satellite phone. A direct line. She had used it only a handful of times since her father's death, always for matters of the gravest importance regarding the holdings. This qualified. She dialed the only number stored in its memory. It rang once before a familiar voice, calm and impeccably professional, answered. "Felicity. I was wondering when you might call." Desmond Pierce had been her father's most trusted advisor, the executor of his estate and the acting CEO of Northgate Holdings. He was a man in his late 60s, with a mind like a steel trap and a loyalty to the Davies family that was absolute. He knew about Lorenzo. He knew about the arrangement. And he had been waiting patiently for his true employer's instructions. "Desmond, Felicity," said her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "It's time." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, not of surprise, but of contemplation. "Are you certain?" "Once this process begins, it is irreversible." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," she said, her eyes catching her own reflection in the mirror. She saw a flicker of her father's iron will there. "Lorenzo is hosting the launch of the Aperture Club tonight, at 9 o'clock. He intends to publicly humiliate me with his mistress. I intend to correct the public record." Desmond absorbed this information. A public venue. That is bold. It will be messy. He has made it messy, Desmond. "I am simply cleaning up," she countered. "I want you to activate Protocol Scion. Full asset reclamation. Effective immediately." Protocol Scion. It was a name she and Desmond had conceived of years ago, a contingency plan for this very scenario. A corporate kill switch designed to dismantle the entire artifice of Lorenzo Holston's career in a single, swift stroke. "Understood," Desmond said. His voice now held a note of grim efficiency. "The legal team has had the paperwork on standby for over a year. I will need your verbal authorization for 3 key actions. First, the immediate termination of Mr. Holston's employment contract as president of Holston Hospitality, citing the gross misconduct clause." "Authorized." Felicity said the word tasting like freedom. Second, the freezing of all corporate and personal credit lines. Bank accounts and assets tied to his name through the Holston Hospitality salary and bonus structure. Authorized. And third, Desmond continued the transfer of all operational authority directly to you as the sole proprietor and chairwoman of the parent company, Northgate Holdings. "We will need to make a public statement. That is the point of tonight," Desmond Felicity replied. "The statement will be made in person. I need you and a small legal team at the Aperture Club. Say 10 o'clock, we will be there. I will bring Mr. Henshaw from legal and 2 of our senior security personnel. Discreet but effective. Perfect. One more thing. I need you to find out who made Tiffany Blair's dress." Desmond was momentarily thrown. Her dress. Yes. Lorenzo mentioned it was being flown in from Milan. A custom piece. Find the designer, the house, the atelier. I want to know its exact cost, and I want you to arrange for the invoice to be delivered to her personally in the middle of the event tonight, with a note that her benefactor's credit line has been permanently severed. A slow, appreciative smile could be heard in Desmond's voice. The daughter of Jonathan Davies indeed. Consider it done, Felicity. We will see you at 10. She ended the call and placed the phone back in the safe. A wave of calm washed over her. The machinery was in motion. The gears of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise were now turning at her command, aligning to execute a single devastating purpose. She turned to her wardrobe. The navy blue dress, which Lorenzo had called plain, now seemed insufficient, not for making a statement of wealth, but for making a statement of power. She pushed it aside and walked towards the very back to a garment bag she hadn't opened in years. Inside was the last gown her father had commissioned for her, for a gala they were to attend together before he passed away. It was a masterpiece of deep emerald silk, cut in a style that was both regal and fiercely modern. It was not a dress for a quiet wife. It was a dress for a queen. As she slipped it on, the fabric felt like armor. She complimented it not with loud, flashy jewels, but with a simple, elegant diamond necklace and earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, pieces whose value was not in their size, but in their history and flawless clarity. They whispered wealth. They didn't scream it. When she emerged from the dressing room 40 minutes later, Lorenzo was impatiently pacing in the living area, checking his phone. Finally, he started to say, then stopped dead. He stared at her, his jaw slackening slightly. He had never seen her like this. The dress, the jewels, the newfound confidence in her posture, it was a combination that completely unsettled him. She was, for the first time, not the Felicity he knew. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but in a way that was suddenly intimidating. Wow, he stammered, recovering slightly. Okay. That's much better. Much better. Where did that come from? It was in the back of my closet, she said, her voice a placid sea, belying the Leviathan moving in its depths. She picked up a small matching clutch from the table. Well, you should wear it more often, he said, his ego quickly reasserting itself. He interpreted her transformation as an effort to please him, to compete for his attention. So you can still pull it out of the bag when you want to. Now let's go. I don't want to be late for my own party. My own party. The words hung in the air. As they rode the private elevator down in silence, Lorenzo was busy scrolling through social media, tracking the buzz for the event. And Aperture Club. Launch was already trending. He was giddy with anticipation. Felicity watched the floor numbers descend. 80, 79, 78. Each floor was a step down from her sanctuary and a step closer to the battlefield. She was not nervous. She felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. Lorenzo thought tonight was his coronation. He had no idea it was his public execution, and she was the one who had signed the warrant. The Aperture Club was the crown jewel of Lorenzo's perceived empire, and its launch party was a testament to his unrestrained extravagance. Located on the top floor of a newly constructed skyscraper that pierced the heart of the financial district, the restaurant was a symphony of bronze marble and glass. A massive retractable skylight, the Aperture, gave the space its name, promising diners a view of the stars. Tonight, however, the main event was the constellation of socialites, city magnates, and media personalities glittering below. The moment they stepped out of the chauffeured car, they were bombarded by the flash of cameras. Lorenzo, in his element, beamed and waved, pulling Felicity close. His hand on the small of her back felt proprietary, a brand. She smiled, a serene, enigmatic expression that the photographers couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the happy, adoring gaze of a trophy wife. It was something else, something knowing. Inside, the air thrummed with champagne-fueled chatter and the smooth sounds of a live jazz quartet. Waitstaff moved through the throng with trays of oysters and caviar. Lorenzo immediately launched into his role as king of the castle, greeting guests with loud backslaps and booming laughs, accepting congratulations for his magnificent achievement. "Lorenzo, my boy, you've outdone yourself," exclaimed a portly real estate developer named Bill Peterson. "Just the beginning." "Bill, just the beginning," Lorenzo roared. "We're changing the game, Holston. Hospitality is the future." Felicity stood by his side, a silent, graceful counterpoint to his bombast. She nodded politely, accepted compliments on his behalf, and played her part to perfection. But beneath the surface she was a predator, scanning the room, marking her targets, and counting the minutes. 9:15 p.m. Desmond would be making his final preparations. She watched as Lorenzo's eyes constantly darted towards the entrance. He was waiting. And right on cue at 9:30 p.m. the crowd near the doorway parted with a collective murmur. Tiffany Blair had arrived. She was not so much wearing a dress as she was inhabiting a spectacle. It was a creation of shimmering fire engine red sequins, cut dangerously low at the front and impossibly high at the side. It was designed to command attention to scream its own expense, and Tiffany wore it with the unshakable confidence of a woman who believes she has already won. Lorenzo's face lit up with a triumphant, possessive grin. He excused himself from the group he was with and strode purposefully towards her. He didn't offer a discreet greeting. He made a show of it. He took both her hands, kissed her loudly on both cheeks, and spun her around for the benefit of the room. "There she is." His voice boomed, silencing the nearby conversations. "The secret weapon behind our team, the one and only Tiffany Blair. Doesn't she look like $1 million? More like 150,000 to be precise." Felicity thought, a cold sliver of amusement touching her lips. Desmond was efficient. Tiffany basked in the attention, her smile wide and predatory. Her eyes found Felicity across the room and held her gaze for a fraction of a second. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory. A look that said, "He's mine. This world is mine." "You are irrelevant." Felicity simply held her gaze, her expression unchanging, before turning to accept a glass of water from a passing waiter. Her calmness was a weapon Tiffany couldn't comprehend. The mistress expected tears, a scene, a retreat. She didn't know how to react to this placid indifference. For the next half hour, Lorenzo paraded Tiffany around the room like a prize. He introduced her to his most important contacts, lauding her brilliant marketing mind. It was a flimsy pretext that fooled no one. They were an item, and he was deliberately and cruelly rubbing it in his wife's face. Felicity watched it all. She saw the uncomfortable shifting of some guests, the gleeful gossip of others. She noted who was loyal, who was opportunistic, and who was simply enjoying the drama. It was all valuable data. She found a quiet spot near the panoramic windows, overlooking the sprawling city lights that glittered like a fallen sky. This was all hers. The building they were in stood on land owned by a Northgate subsidiary. The construction had been financed by a Northgate investment fund. The catering company, the security firm, the valet service, all were contracted through businesses in which Northgate held a significant stake. Lorenzo was a child playing with his father's toys, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother owned the entire toy store. "A bit overwhelming, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. She turned to see Robert Chen, a respected older banker, whose firm had a long-standing and very discreet relationship with Northgate Holdings. He was one of the few people in the room who knew who she truly was. "Hello, Robert," she said warmly. "It is quite the spectacle." Robert looked across the room at Lorenzo, who was now laughing obnoxiously with his arm draped around Tiffany's shoulders. "He's a peacock, that husband of yours," he said, his voice low. "Always has been. But peacocks can't fly very high. They just strut and make a lot of noise." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes twinkling. "I always wondered when you'd get tired of the noise." "The acoustics in this room are certainly revealing," Felicity replied, her words chosen with care. Robert nodded, understanding her meaning perfectly. "Indeed. Well, if you ever decide to change the music, you know you have friends who value a more classical composition." He gave her a subtle, supportive nod and moved away. The brief exchange solidified her resolve. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. It was about legacy. Lorenzo's gaudy, reckless behavior was a stain on the quiet, dignified empire her father had built. 9:55 p.m. 5 minutes. Felicity began to move from the window, her path taking her on a slow, deliberate collision course with the center of the room where Lorenzo held court. He saw her approaching, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Her presence was an inconvenience to his grand performance with Tiffany. "Ah, darling," he said, his tone patronizing as she drew near. "Getting sociable, are we? I want you to properly meet Tiffany. Tiffany, this is my wife, Felicity." Tiffany offered a saccharine smile. "It's so lovely to finally be introduced," she purred, emphasizing the finally with dripping condescension. "Your husband is just the most brilliant man I have ever met. The vision he has for this place, it's legendary." "My husband is certainly ambitious," Felicity replied, her voice as smooth as polished marble. Lorenzo, feeling emboldened by the audience and the champagne, decided to push his humiliation a step further. He draped his arm more firmly around Tiffany, pulling her into his side. "Lissy is more of the quiet homebody type," he announced to the circle of onlookers. "She handles the charities and the dinner parties. I handle the real work, the building of empires. We all have our strengths, don't we?" It was the final public dismissal, the moment she had been waiting for. She looked him directly in the eye, her placid mask finally falling away to reveal the chilling calm beneath. "You're mistaken, Lorenzo," she said, her voice not loud, but carrying with such sudden authority that the entire group fell silent. "Your strength isn't in building empires, it's in public relations, and you've just made your last official statement." Before he could process the strange finality of her words, the grand double doors of the restaurant swung open. The ambient chatter of the party died down as everyone turned to look. Framed in the doorway stood Desmond Pierce, flanked by two imposing men in sharp, dark suits. He was the picture of gravitas, his silver hair immaculate, his expression unreadable. He held a leather folio in his hand. The clock on the far wall struck 10. The performance was over. The reckoning had begun. The arrival of Desmond Pierce and his associates had an immediate chilling effect on the room's atmosphere. The jazz quartet faltered, then fell silent. The lively hum of conversation evaporated, replaced by a tense, expectant hush. These were not party guests. These were men who moved with an unnerving purpose. Their presence a stark black and white photograph dropped into a colorful oil painting. Lorenzo stared, his brow furrowed in confusion. He recognized Desmond Pierce, of course, but only in a vague peripheral sense. He was the stone-faced lawyer type who handled the initial paperwork for the investor consortium years ago. He was a background character, a functionary. What was he doing, crashing the biggest night of his life? "Who the hell is that?" Tiffany whispered, her sequined facade looking suddenly cheap under the harsh reality of the intrusion. Lorenzo waved a dismissive hand, trying to reclaim control. "Party crashers! Security!" he called out, though his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. Desmond's gaze swept the room, calm and assessing, before it landed on the trio at its center. He began to walk forward, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The two men with him fanned out, not aggressively, but with an unmistakable air of authority, creating a clear path. The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea. "Mr. Holston," Desmond said, his voice level and devoid of any warmth. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. He stopped, a respectful but firm 10 feet away. "Pierce," Lorenzo snapped, his face reddening with anger. "This is a private event. Whatever it is you want, it can wait until Monday morning. Now get out before I have you thrown out." "I'm afraid it cannot wait," Desmond replied, his eyes briefly flicking to Felicity. He saw the resolute look on her face and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The signal was received. "I am here on behalf of the beneficial owner of Northgate Holdings, the parent company of Holston Hospitality." A ripple of confusion went through the assembled guests. Northgate Holdings. The name was known only in the most elite financial circles, a mythical entity that never sought the spotlight. What did it have to do with Lorenzo's trendy restaurant chain? Lorenzo laughed, a harsh, braying sound. "Northgate. That's my silent partner. My money. You have no authority to speak to me here. You report to me, old man. Now I'm warning you." "You are mistaken, Mr. Holston." Desmond interrupted, his tone hardening. "I do not report to you. I report to her." And with that, he turned his head and looked directly at Felicity. Every eye in the room followed his gaze. For a moment, there was a collective silent processing of this impossible statement. The quiet, mousy wife. The background fixture. It didn't make sense. Lorenzo's laugh caught in his throat. "Her." "You mean Felicity?" "What the hell are you talking about? She doesn't know the first thing about business. She plans garden parties." Tiffany snorted with derisive laughter, but it died quickly as she saw the deadly seriousness on Desmond's face. Felicity took a step forward, separating herself from her husband's toxic orbit. She felt as if she were stepping out of a shadow and into the light for the first time in years. "He's right, Lorenzo," she said, her voice now ringing with a strength no one in the room had ever heard from her. "I don't plan garden parties. I own the garden, and the estate, and the company that caters the parties." She turned her attention to the stunned guests. "My name is Felicity Davies Holston. My late father was Jonathan Davies, the founder of Northgate Holdings." A wave of audible gasps swept through the crowd. The Davies name was legend. It was a name associated with unimaginable, generationally entrenched wealth. It was a name that made Lorenzo Holston's flashy new money persona look like a child's sandcastle next to a mountain. Lorenzo's face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. "Davies, no. That's not possible. Your family was comfortable." "My father valued privacy above all else," Felicity said, her gaze locking with his. "A value you clearly have never understood. When we married, I chose to keep my background private. I funded your ambition anonymously through my family's holding company because I wanted a partner, not a parasite. I wanted to see what you would build if given the chance. And all you have built is this monument to your own ego on my family's foundation." Her words were precise, each one a hammer blow shattering the fragile glass of his reality. "That's a lie," he sputtered, looking wildly around for support. "She's lying." "Tell them, Pierce." Desmond opened the leather folio he was carrying. "I'm afraid every word she has spoken is the documented truth," he announced to the room. "Holston Hospitality is and always has been a wholly owned subsidiary of Northgate Holdings. The sole owner and acting chairwoman of Northgate Holdings is Mrs. Felicity Davies Holston. Mr. Holston is not the owner. He is a salaried employee. Or rather," he paused, pulling out a single sheet of paper. He was. He took a step forward and held the paper out to Lorenzo. "This is a letter of termination for your position as president of Holston Hospitality, effective immediately, citing Clause 17B of your employment contract regarding gross moral turpitude and actions bringing the company into disrepute." Lorenzo stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't take it. Beside him, Tiffany was hyperventilating. The color drained from her face as the implications crashed down on her. The money, the power, the access, it wasn't his. It was hers. The woman she had mocked and dismissed was the source of it all. Just then a young woman in a courier's uniform, who had slipped in unnoticed behind Desmond's team, stepped forward. She approached Tiffany Blair. "Miss Tiffany Blair?" she asked timidly. Tiffany just stared, mute. "I have a delivery for you," the courier said, handing her a crisp envelope. With trembling fingers, Tiffany opened it. Inside was a multi-page invoice from a renowned Milanese fashion house for €157,000. Clipped to it was a small embossed card. Felicity watched as Tiffany read it. The note was simple. "As of 10:05 p.m. this evening, the credit line of Mr. Lorenzo Holston has been permanently closed. We trust you will be able to make your own arrangements for payment. Northgate Holdings, accounts payable." The invoice fluttered from Tiffany's numb fingers and drifted to the floor. The show-stopping red dress suddenly looked like a clown costume, a garish symbol of a catastrophic miscalculation. The entire room was frozen in a state of suspended shock, witnessing a social and financial execution of breathtaking speed and precision. Lorenzo Holston, the titan of industry, had been exposed as a fraud, and his quiet, unassuming wife was revealed to be the true titan, a hidden empress who had just reclaimed her throne. The silence that followed the revelation was profound, broken only by the faint hysterical gasp from Tiffany. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Lorenzo stood, frozen, his face a grotesque canvas of confusion, denial, and dawning horror. The universe as he knew it had just been turned inside out. "This is a joke," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He looked at Felicity, his eyes pleading for the first time in their marriage. "Lissy, what is this? Tell them it's a joke. Some kind of twisted prank." Felicity's expression was implacable. "The only joke, Lorenzo, was my belief that you were a man of substance. That was my mistake. And as of tonight, it is one I have rectified." Desmond Pierce, ever the professional, took charge of the narrative. "Mr. Holston," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room, "your corporate accounts have been frozen. Your key cards for the office and all company properties have been deactivated. The vehicle leased to you by the company is to be returned by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your personal effects from the office will be couriered to an address of your choosing." He gestured to one of the security men. "This is Frank. He will escort you from the premises now." Frank, a man built like a refrigerator, took a step towards Lorenzo. Reality finally hit Lorenzo like a physical blow. This wasn't a prank. This was real. This was the end. His carefully constructed world was not just cracking. It was being systematically demolished before his very eyes. A primal rage erupted from him. "You can't do this!" he roared, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at Felicity. "You bitch! After everything I did, I built this. This was all me." "You built nothing," Felicity replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You were given a limitless budget, and you spent it. My father built a legacy of quiet, solid strength. You built a glittering facade to hide your own insecurities. This restaurant, this party, this entire brand is a reflection of you, Lorenzo, gaudy, loud, and fundamentally hollow." The public dressing down was brutal. The guests who had once clamored for his attention now stared at him with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. He was no longer a king in his court. He was a court jester whose act had worn thin. "Security!" he shrieked again, his voice shrill with panic. "Get these people out of my restaurant," the head of the event's security detail. A man who had been taking orders from Lorenzo all night now looked hesitantly towards Desmond and Felicity. Desmond gave a slight shake of his head. The message was clear. There had been a change in management. Frank, the Northgate security man, placed a firm hand on Lorenzo's shoulder. "Sir, it's time to go." Lorenzo tried to shrug him off, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "Get your hands off me. Don't you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Halston," Desmond said coolly. "A former employee. Please do not make this more unpleasant than it needs to be." As Frank began to steer the sputtering, protesting Lorenzo towards the exit, all eyes turned to Tiffany. Her brief reign as the queen-in-waiting was over. She was now just a girl in a very expensive dress she couldn't afford, stranded in the wreckage of her ambition. She looked from the defeated Lorenzo to the powerful, composed Felicity. In a moment of sheer reptilian survival instinct, she made her choice. "I can't believe he lied to me," she cried out, tears of self-pity welling in her eyes. She looked at Felicity, her expression pleading. "He told me he was leaving you. He told me you two had an arrangement. I had no idea. I am as much a victim here as you are." The performance was so transparently false it was almost comical. Felicity regarded her with a look of utter disinterest, as if examining a mildly unpleasant insect. "Your arrangements with Mr. Halston are your own affair," Felicity said, her voice dismissive. "As is your invoice from Milan. Now I believe you are also leaving." The second Northgate security guard stepped towards Tiffany. She didn't need to be physically escorted. With a final desperate sob, she gathered the shreds of her dignity, turned and practically fled towards the exit. Her red sequined dress a retreating beacon of humiliation. The room watched as Lorenzo Halston, the man of the hour, was unceremoniously marched out of his own launch party. He was still shouting, still threatening lawsuits, still proclaiming his own genius. But his words were the hollow, meaningless echoes of a power that no longer existed. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving a stunned and silent party in his wake. For a long moment, nobody moved. The spectacle was over. Felicity Davies Halston stood alone in the center of the room, the undisputed, and until tonight, unknown center of power. She turned to face her guests, her expression composed. The awkwardness was palpable. What does one say after a public corporate execution? Felicity, however, was in full control. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice calm and assured, please accept my sincerest apologies for that unpleasant piece of corporate housekeeping. It was a matter that regrettably required a public resolution. She gave a small, wry smile. It seems Holston Hospitality is under new management, effective immediately. I would like to thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate the launch of the Aperture Club. The vision for this establishment was always one of elegance and excellence, and I intend to see that vision fully realized. She raised her glass of water. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. The champagne is excellent, the food is superb, and the view, as always, is breathtaking. To new beginnings. The tension in the room broke. Someone started to clap, a tentative, hesitant sound. Then another joined, and another, until the entire room erupted in a wave of applause. It was a surreal moment. They were applauding not just her composure, but her power. They were witnessing the birth of a new icon in their world, a woman who had emerged from the shadows with the force of a hurricane. The jazz quartet, taking their cue, softly began to play again. Waiters resumed their rounds. The chatter started to build back up, now buzzing with the most sensational piece of gossip the city had seen in decades. Felicity had not just won. She had rewritten the entire game. And as she stood there, calmly surveying the room that was unequivocally hers, she felt not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. She was finally and completely free. The fallout from that night was not a wave, but a tsunami. By morning, every major news outlet and gossip blog had the story. The headlines were sensational. Hospitality king dethroned by secret heiress wife. The Holston hoax, Gregory Holston exposed as fraud. Billionaire bride's revenge. Felicity Davies reclaims her empire. The story was accompanied by blurry cell phone pictures from inside the party. Lorenzo's enraged face, Tiffany's tearful escape, and Felicity's regal, unshakable composure. For Lorenzo, the world ceased to exist. After being thrown out of the restaurant, he discovered his key to the penthouse no longer worked. The doorman at the Olympus, who had bowed to him for years, stopped him with a polite but firm, "I'm sorry, sir. You are no longer listed as a resident." His phone, a company device, was remotely wiped and deactivated an hour later. His credit cards, both corporate and the personal one, linked to his massive salary, were declined when he tried to check into a hotel. He was a ghost in the city he thought he owned. He ended up at the apartment of a sycophantic junior executive, a young man who was terrified but too intimidated to turn him away. From there, Lorenzo spent the next 48 hours in a spiraling vortex of rage and disbelief. He tried to call his lawyers, only to be reminded that his high-powered legal team was on retainer by Holston Hospitality, and now took their orders from Felicity. The independent lawyers he contacted quoted him retainers he couldn't possibly pay. He had no money. The accounts he thought were his were merely salary accounts, and the funds within had been frozen, pending a final audit for any misappropriated company expenses. He tried to call his friends, the developers and financiers, who had slapped him on the back just nights before. Most didn't answer. The few who did were curt and distant. In the world they inhabited, power was everything. Lorenzo no longer had any. He was radioactive. Tiffany Blair vanished. Her social media was deleted, her phone number disconnected. The last anyone heard, she was desperately trying to sell the designer clothes and jewelry Lorenzo had bought her, to pay the massive bill for the red dress and to buy a plane ticket back to whatever small town she had crawled out of. Her 15 minutes of fame had ended in a lifetime of debt and infamy. While Lorenzo's world imploded, Felicity's was solidifying. She spent the day after the party in the main boardroom of Holston Hospitality, a room Lorenzo had decorated with oversized portraits of himself. The first thing she did was order them taken down. With Desmond Pierce by her side, she met with the stunned but professional executive team. There was no gloating, no drama, just crisp, efficient, and intelligent command. She laid out her vision for the company's future, a move away from Lorenzo's flashy trend-chasing projects, and a return to the core Davies family values of timeless luxury, impeccable service, and shrewd, sustainable investment. "The name will be changing," she announced to the board. "Holston Hospitality is a brand built on a fiction. We will be rebranding as the Davies Collection. Our reputation will be built not on the personality of one man, but on the quality of our service and the integrity of our name." The team, who had long grown tired of Lorenzo's tyrannical ego and erratic management style, were visibly relieved. They saw in Felicity a leader of quiet confidence and formidable intelligence. The ship had been steadied, and its new captain clearly knew how to navigate. A week later, Lorenzo was served with divorce papers. They were delivered to him at a cheap coffee shop where he was trying to use the public Wi-Fi. The terms were brutal and non-negotiable. According to the prenuptial agreement he had arrogantly signed without reading, closely believing his own future earnings would dwarf her family money, he was entitled to nothing. The agreement had an infidelity clause that was now easily provable, negating any potential for spousal support. He would leave the marriage with only the personal possessions he had brought into it. He was left with less than nothing. He was left with a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that no one in the industry would touch him. The most cutting part of the legal documents was a small annexed note. It was a bill from Northgate Holdings for $2.3 million, the audited cost of personal extravagances he had charged to the company over 5 years. Lavish trips with Tiffany custom suits, gambling debts, and gifts for associates. The note stated that the company was willing to forego prosecution for corporate fraud if he signed the divorce papers without contest and agreed to a permanent non-disclosure agreement. It was a checkmate. He was cornered, penniless and powerless. He signed. The final crushing humiliation came a month after the gala. Lorenzo, now living in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, saw an article in Apex Business Quarterly. The cover, which had once featured his own smiling face, now showed Felicity. She stood not in a flashy restaurant, but in front of a blueprint, her expression focused and powerful. The headline read, "The Matriarch Takes the Helm. Felicity Davies and the Rebirth of an Empire." The article detailed the true history of Northgate Holdings and lauded her bold, decisive actions in restructuring the company. It painted Lorenzo as a footnote, a temporary and deeply flawed manager who had been swiftly removed. He wasn't even a villain in the story. He was an error that had been corrected. He had been rendered irrelevant. He threw the magazine across the room, the sound of its pages hitting the wall a pathetic thud in the silence of his new life. He had flown so close to the sun, convinced he was a god of fire, only to find out the sun was never his. He was just a moth drawn to a flame that was never meant for him, and he had been burned to ash. The silence in his tiny apartment was different from the silence in the penthouse. That one had been full of unspoken tension. This one was simply empty. It was the sound of his own personal abyss. 6 months passed. The city, with its short memory for yesterday's scandals, moved on. The name Lorenzo Holston was now only ever spoken as a cautionary tale at cocktail parties. The Davies Collection, however, was a name synonymous with a new era of quiet, confident luxury. Felicity had proven to be a natural leader, possessing her father's shrewd business acumen, combined with a modern, more empathetic approach. She had not just saved the company. She was making it better, more profitable, and more respected than ever before. She sold off the gaudier assets Lorenzo had acquired and reinvested in properties that reflected her vision of lasting elegance. The Aperture Club was renamed the North Gate. She had the bronze and marble interior softened with classic wood and rich fabrics. The ostentatious "look at me" atmosphere was replaced with one of understated sophistication. It became the most sought-after reservation in the city, not for the scene, but for the impeccable food and flawless service. One crisp autumn afternoon, Felicity stood on a construction site, a hard hat on her head. It was the future site of the flagship hotel for the Davies collection. She was reviewing architectural plans with her project manager. "The steel supplier confirmed the delivery for next Tuesday, Ms. Davies," the manager said, pointing to a section of the blueprint. "The first foundational beams will be in place by the end of the month." "Excellent," Felicity said, her eyes scanning the complex drawings with an expert's ease. "Ensure the quality control is rigorous. I want every rivet, every weld inspected twice." As she spoke, she caught a glimpse of movement on the street corner opposite the site. A man stood there, thin and poorly dressed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was staring at her, his face a mixture of resentment and awe. It was Lorenzo. He looked like a ghost. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting coat. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a broken man. He had apparently found some menial, low-level job, but the fire in him was extinguished. He had likely come to see what she was building to witness the empire he thought was his thriving without him. For a moment their eyes met across the bustling street. There was no anger left in Felicity, no desire for revenge. There was only a quiet, sad finality. He was a chapter of her life that was now closed, a lesson learned. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was not a greeting of friendship or a gesture of pity. It was an acknowledgement, a final dismissal. Then she turned her back on him, returning her attention to the plans for her building. She picked up a marker and made a small, decisive change to the blueprint circling a structural element. "Let's reinforce this section here," she said to her manager. "I want the foundation to be unshakable." She initialed the change with her signature, KD. It was the same signature that had signed the documents creating the company, the same one that had signed the termination papers, and the same one that now authorized the placement of the first steel beam of a true and lasting legacy. Her legacy, built not on lies or borrowed glory, but on her own strength, her own name, and a foundation of solid steel. Lorenzo Halston was a memory on the pavement. Felicity Davies was the architect of the skyline. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the revenge. It was about the reclamation of a name and the rediscovery of a strength that had been silent for far too long. Felicity Davies Halston taught us that true power isn't loud and arrogant. It's quiet, patient, and waits for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Lorenzo Halston built his world on sand and was shocked when the tide of truth inevitably washed it all away. It's a powerful reminder that you can never truly own something that you haven't earned with integrity. Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly get what they deserve? What did you think of Felicity's final decisive move? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this story of long-awaited justice and empowerment, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs a story of quiet strength, and most importantly, Subscribe to our channel for more dramatic tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a single moment of the drama. Thank you for listening.